John's boat wasn't just any boat. It was a piece of history, an authentic military patrol boat he had painstakingly restored over the years. The deep green camo paint, the rugged steel hull, the faint scars from past missions, all of it told a story of service and sacrifice. To John, it wasn't just a hobby or a vehicle. It was a living memory of his time in the military, a tribute to the brothers and sisters he'd left behind. Nestled in the serene cul-de-sac of Meadowbrook Estates, the neighborhood was known for its pristine lawns, perfectly trimmed hedges, and a strict homeowners association that enforced every rule to the letter. On the surface, it was the perfect place for a veteran looking for peace. But John's boat, docked prominently in his driveway, didn't blend in with the rows of beige SUVs and pastel sedans. It stood out, a silent emblem of history, pride, and something the HOA wasn't entirely comfortable with. On this particular spring evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, John stood outside, admiring his boat. He ran a hand across the weathered steel, feeling the grooves and ridges beneath his fingers. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet almost. The hum of sprinklers and the distant bark of a dog were the only sounds. But then John noticed something unsettling. Across the street, near the corner where the streetlight flickered erratically, a shadow moved. Just a flicker at first, barely noticeable, but enough to make John's gut tighten. He squinted, trying to make out who it was, but the figure melted into the dark before he could focus. Shrugging it off as a passerby or a neighbor on an evening walk, John turned back to his boat. Still, the unease lingered. Later that night, as John lay in bed, the image of the shadow replayed in his mind. It wasn't just the shadow itself, but the way it lingered near his property, like someone was watching, waiting for the right moment. The next morning, John went outside early, breathing in the crisp air. The boat gleamed in the morning light, every detail sharp and clear. Neighbors started emerging from their homes, some offering nods and smiles, others casting curious glances at the boat. It was during one of these casual morning encounters that John first heard murmurs of discontent. From behind a neatly trimmed hedge, Mrs. Whitman, a longtime resident and HOA committee member, whispered to another neighbor, "That boat, it just doesn't belong here. It's an eyesore. The HOA's going to do something about it?" John's heart sank. He had done everything by the book, obtained all necessary permits, ensured his boat was parked within HOA guidelines, and maintained its condition impeccably. Yet to some, his boat was a problem. By afternoon, the whispers had grown louder. John caught snippets of conversations about ruining the neighborhood's charm and rules being rules. He even found a small anonymous note slipped under his door. "Paint that thing over or face the consequences." John's military discipline kicked in. He wasn't about to back down, especially over something that symbolized so much to him. But deep down, he wondered, who would go this far to make him remove a boat? That evening, the sense of being watched returned with a vengeance. From his bedroom window, John spotted a figure lurking near the edge of the cul-de-sac again, this time closer, more deliberate. The figure seemed to be surveying the boat, moving slowly, cautiously, almost like a predator stalking its prey. John's heart pounded. He reached for his phone to call a neighbor, but then the figure disappeared into the darkness. Was this just an overly obsessed HOA member? Or was something more sinister unfolding right under his nose? The calm of Meadowbrook Estates had cracked, and John knew the storm was coming. The next morning, John woke to the usual buzz of lawnmowers and distant chatter. But for him, the calm was shattered by an email notification. It was from the HOA board, marked urgent. The subject line read, "Regarding your property at 14 Meadowbrook." John's fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. The message was curt and formal, accusing him of violating the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. The boat's military camouflage, they claimed, was inappropriate and detracts from the community's visual harmony. They demanded that he repaint the boat within 14 days, or face penalties. John stared at the screen in disbelief. They couldn't be serious. His boat wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol of his service. Repainting it to fit some cookie-cutter image felt like erasing his identity. Determined to fight back, John decided to attend the next HOA meeting. He wanted to present his case, explain what the boat meant to him, and plead for understanding. But as the days passed, he began to notice a shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. The quiet, polite greetings at the mailbox turned into cold stares and whispers behind his back. One afternoon, while watering his garden, he overheard a conversation between two neighbors. "That military boat is just a problem waiting to happen. I don't know why the HOA lets him get away with it." Even more unsettling was the growing presence of Karen, a middle-aged woman with a sharp gaze and a relentless attitude. Karen was a member of the HOA board, notorious in the neighborhood for her fierce dedication to community standards. She seemed to have singled John out at a community barbecue. Karen cornered John. "This neighborhood has rules, John. We all agreed to them when we moved here. Your boat, well, it doesn't fit with the image we want for Meadowbrook. You need to comply." John tried to reason with her, explaining the military significance of the boat, but Karen's eyes narrowed. "It's just paint," she said coldly. "And if you don't fix it, I'll make sure the HOA takes action." John left the barbecue feeling unsettled. Karen's tone wasn't just about rules. It felt personal. That night, John began receiving anonymous messages on his phone, vague threats, warnings to remove the eyesore, and eerie photos of his boat taken from a distance. Someone was watching him closely, and it wasn't just Karen, though she was the obvious suspect. The tension escalated when John found a small, spray-painted symbol on the sidewalk near his driveway. It was crude and childish, but unmistakably targeted at him. A warning or a challenge. As John prepared for the HOA meeting, he realized this was no longer just a dispute over property rules. This had become a quiet war, a battle for respect, identity, and control. And Karen was leading the charge. The meeting room was packed with residents, many with wary expressions. Karen took the floor first, delivering a sharp speech about community standards, visual harmony, and the importance of unity. Her words felt like a call to arms against John's boat. When John finally spoke, his voice was steady but passionate. He recounted his military service, the boat's significance, and his commitment to the community. For a moment, the room was silent. Then murmurs broke out. But Karen wasn't done. She presented a petition with dozens of signatures from neighbors, demanding the boat's repainting or removal. The room's mood shifted. The tide seemed to turn against John. Just as the HOA chairman was about to call for a vote, John noticed Karen's smirk. It wasn't just about the boat to her. It was about power, control, and sending a message. As the meeting adjourned, John stepped outside into the cooling night air, heart pounding. He knew the battle was far from over. Karen had made her move, and the neighborhood was rallying behind her. But John wasn't ready to back down. Not yet, because beneath the surface of this quiet cul-de-sac, something darker was stirring, and soon it would explode. Days passed after the tense HOA meeting, but the uneasy calm that John had hoped for never arrived. Instead, the hostility simmered beneath polite facades, tightening like a noose around him. Every time he glanced at his boat, parked proudly, in his driveway, a nagging fear gnawed at the edges of his mind. How long before Karen, or someone on her side, made good on their threats? That night, John tried to push the fear away. He sat on his porch, sipping a cold beer, watching the neighborhood settle into quiet slumber. The stars twinkled overhead, oblivious to the storm brewing below. Suddenly, a sound shattered the silence, a faint rustling from the direction of the driveway. John's instincts snapped to attention. His heart raced as he rose, eyes scanning the shadows. The streetlight flickered unevenly, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. There, moving near the boat, a figure cloaked in black crouched low, armed with cans of spray paint. John's breath caught in his throat. For a brief moment, the figure froze, sensing John's gaze. Then, like a ghost, they dashed toward the boat, shaking a bright can of paint with a harsh hiss. Streaks of glaring neon colors, pink, yellow, and orange, smeared across the carefully restored camo, desecrating years of work in a few careless strokes. John couldn't move fast enough. By the time he reached the driveway, the figure had vanished into the night. The boat was a disaster, a neon nightmare splattered over the once proud military green. John's hands trembled as he surveyed the damage, anger and heartbreak warring inside him. But amid the chaos, his trained eyes caught something unusual, a small, glinting object half hidden beneath the boat. He bent down and picked it up. Tiny fragment of black plastic with a sharp corner, part of a spray paint can's nozzle. John pocketed the piece, a seed of hope amid the wreckage. The next morning, news of the vandalism spread quickly through Meadowbrook Estates. Some neighbors expressed sympathy, but others whispered about provocation and rules being broken. The HOA board issued a statement condemning the act, but stopped short of identifying any suspects. Karen, predictably, remained silent. John filed a police report detailing the damage and providing the tiny clue he'd found. The local officers took the case seriously, recognizing that vandalism against a veteran's property was a sensitive matter. But John knew this wasn't just random vandalism. It was personal. Someone had wanted to send a message, and the message was clear. Your boat doesn't belong here. That evening, John met with his closest neighbor, Maria, a retired schoolteacher who had quietly supported him from the beginning. John, she said cautiously, I think Karen's behind this. She's been acting strange lately, talking to some people late at night, and I heard her bragging about teaching him a lesson. John nodded grimly. I'm going to dig deeper. If Karen's involved, she's going to regret crossing me. As John investigated, he discovered unsettling details. Karen had recently bought large quantities of spray paint and cleaning solvents. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises outside late at night, quiet footsteps and the hiss of cans. But when John confronted Karen directly, she smiled with icy calm. I don't know what you're talking about, she said smoothly. Maybe you're imagining things. People don't like change, John. Maybe that's all. The tension escalated into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. John installed security cameras, but some nights, the footage mysteriously disappeared or was corrupted. Despite the fear and frustration, John's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. It was about standing up to intimidation and protecting his dignity. Unknown to John, however, Karen had already taken her campaign beyond the neighborhood, pulling strings with powerful contacts and setting wheels in motion that would soon bring unexpected forces into the battle. As the neon paint dried on John's boat, the quiet war in Meadowbrook Estates was about to ignite into a firestorm no one could ignore. John sat at his kitchen table, the harsh fluorescent light casting sharp shadows over the mess of documents and photos spread before him. The damaged boat loomed in his mind, neon paint still glaring in daylight like a beacon of defiance and humiliation. The spray-painted mess was more than vandalism. It was a challenge. And John was ready to answer. His first move was to go through the official channels. He filed a formal complaint with the HOA, demanding an investigation. But the response was lukewarm, bureaucratic letters promising to look into the matter with no real action. The HOA's public statement condemned vandalism, but stopped. Short of naming any suspects or promising consequences, Karen's silence spoke volumes. John's next step was the police. The officers were courteous, took his report seriously, and promised to follow up. But he knew that local law enforcement could only do so much without concrete evidence. Determined not to be pushed around, John reached out to a local journalist known for exposing community scandals. He shared his story, the mounting hostility, the spray paint attack, and the disturbing possibility that someone inside the HOA was behind it. Within days, the story ran in the community paper, stirring public opinion. Some neighbors voiced support, others doubled down against him. But the spotlight made it clear. John wasn't going away quietly. That night, John received an unexpected call. "John, this is Agent Harris with the Federal Military Property Protection Unit. We've been informed about the vandalism to your boat." The voice was calm but firm. "Because your boat is registered as federal military property, this isn't just a local matter anymore." John's heart skipped a beat. Federal involvement? That changed everything, Agent Harris explained. That federal law strictly protects military equipment even when privately owned by veterans. Vandalizing such property could lead to serious criminal charges, not just local penalties. John felt a surge of hope, but also knew the battle was only escalating. With federal agents now investigating, the stakes shot up. Karen's quiet war against him was no longer just a neighborhood feud. It had the potential to unravel into a full-blown legal nightmare. John decided to confront the HOA board in writing, outlining the legal implications and warning that any attempts to silence him would be met with federal scrutiny. He also posted updates on social media, rallying support from veteran groups and the local community, but Karen's response was swift and ruthless. Anonymous messages started flooding John's phone again, threats disguised as warnings. His security? Cameras captured fleeting images of suspicious figures near his home, but nothing concrete enough to stop the harassment. At a neighborhood gathering, John's closest allies whispered caution. "Karen's got connections," Maria warned. "This isn't just about a boat anymore. She's playing for keeps." John nodded, his jaw clenched. The community was fracturing, neighbors taking sides, alliances shifting like quicksand. Then came the anonymous note slipped under his door one morning. "You think the feds will save you? Think again." It was clear now. Karen wasn't going down without a fight, and she was prepared to drag John into the mud. But John's resolve hardened. He wasn't just fighting for his boat anymore. He was fighting for his honor, his service, and his right to live in peace. He began documenting everything, every threat, every suspicious move, every interaction with the HOA and neighbors. This war of wills was no longer a silent battle. It was out in the open, and John was ready to win. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Karen was stirring the pot. She met with lawyers and made calls to influential contacts, setting plans into motion that could tip the scales in her favor. John didn't know it yet, but his quiet neighborhood battle was about to draw in forces far beyond Meadowbrook Estates. The war was no longer just local, it was national, and the next move could change everything. John's life was no longer his own. Every morning he woke up half expecting trouble, an angry call, a late-night knock, or worse. But what arrived that day caught him completely off guard. At his front door stood two men in dark suits, their demeanor professional, but unyielding. One flashed a badge. Federal Special Agents with the Military Property Protection Division. John swallowed hard. "You're with the feds?" The agents nodded solemnly. "We're here because your boat is registered as a military asset. Vandalizing it is a federal offense." John felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Finally, his case was being taken seriously, but he also knew federal investigations could drag on, stirring up more trouble than he'd bargained for. Agent Harris introduced himself and his partner, Agent Collins. They explained the gravity of the situation. Not only was John's boat vandalized, but this was being treated as an attack on federal property, something that rarely happened in peaceful suburban neighborhoods. "Do you have any suspects?" Agent Collins asked. John hesitated. I think it's someone on the HOA board. A woman named Karen. She's been pushing against me for months." The agents exchanged glances. "We've heard about her," Harris said quietly. "She has a reputation for being aggressive, but we need solid evidence." John handed over the spray paint nozzle fragment he'd found and detailed the harassment he'd faced, the threats, the anonymous notes, the suspicious activity captured on his security cameras. The agents promised to increase surveillance on his property and interview neighbors. For the first time, John felt like he had an official shield. But Karen was not one to back down. Unbeknownst to John, Karen received word of the federal investigation through her contacts in local law enforcement. Panic flickered in her eyes, but quickly hardened into defiance. She wasn't about to be railroaded by a veteran who dared to defy her. Karen ramped up her campaign behind the scenes, enlisting some neighbors who shared her vision of community standards. Together they spread rumors painting John as a troublemaker, an outsider disrupting the peace. The neighborhood's once friendly vibe turned toxic. John found himself isolated, the target of whispered conversations and suspicious glances. At one HOA meeting, Karen stood before the group with a polished presentation. She framed John as a stubborn veteran who refused to follow the rules, accusing him of intimidation and creating division. Many neighbors nodded, their loyalty swaying. But just as Karen gained momentum, the federal agents made a surprising move. They called an emergency meeting with the HOA board. In a room heavy with tension, Agent Harris laid out the legal reality. Vandalizing federally registered military property was a criminal offense with serious consequences. The HOA had a duty to cooperate fully or risk legal repercussions themselves. Karen's confident smirk faltered. The weight of federal authority pressed down on the board, fracturing their resolve. Yet Karen wasn't defeated. Late that night, John's security system picked up movement around his property again. This time the footage was clear. Karen herself lurking near the boat, holding cans of spray paint. John watched the video in stunned silence. The evidence was undeniable. He immediately sent the footage to the agents. The next morning, federal agents arrived with a warrant for Karen's home, signaling a turning point. Her defiance had crossed a line. This was no longer just an HOA dispute, but as Karen faced mounting legal trouble, she doubled down, threatening to expose secrets John hadn't even imagined. In the quiet moments after the agents left, John realized the war had escalated far beyond his boat. This was about power, pride, and something darker simmering beneath the surface of Meadowbrook Estates. And now, with the feds involved, no one could predict how far the fallout would go. The federal agents' raid on Karen's home sent shockwaves through Meadowbrook Estates. Whispers spread like wildfire. The ruthless HOA board member was now a suspect in a federal investigation. But the truth behind Karen's actions was more complicated and darker than anyone expected. John sat across from Agent Harris at the local police station, his mind racing as the agent flipped through a file. Karen's been involved in more than just this vandalism, Harris said quietly. We've uncovered a history of intimidation tactics, some bordering on criminal behavior, but it goes deeper. John frowned. What do you mean? Agent Harris looked up. Karen has ties to a group that specializes in aggressive HOA enforcement, sometimes crossing legal lines. We believe she used her position to push personal vendettas under the guise of community standards. This isn't just about your boat, it's about control. John's jaw tightened. So she's been targeting me because I stood up to her? Exactly. And there's more, Harris added. Our investigation revealed she's been manipulating HOA records, falsifying complaints, and coercing neighbors to join her campaign. John thought back to the cold stares, the anonymous notes, the way some neighbors suddenly turned against him. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated. But the most startling discovery came when Harris pulled out a folder marked Confidential. "Look at this," Harris said, sliding a photo across the table. It was a picture of Karen standing near John's boat, only in this one she was spray painting a crude symbol. John stared. "That's from my security footage," we confirmed. "The date and time. She's been lying to the board and to you." The revelation hit John like a punch to the gut. Karen had gone to extremes to sabotage him, all while wearing a mask of authority. Determined to end the harassment, John worked closely with the federal agents, providing every piece of evidence he had. The agents coordinated with local police, and soon Karen was arrested on charges of vandalism, harassment, and fraud related to her HOA activities. The neighborhood buzzed with shock and disbelief. Some residents expressed regret for backing Karen. Others tried to distance themselves. John felt a bittersweet victory. His boat was still scarred by neon paint, but now the truth was out. Yet as Karen faced legal battles, she hinted at a final desperate move. From her jail cell, she sent a cryptic letter to John. "You think you've won, but you don't know the whole story. There are others watching. Be careful, John." The warning left John uneasy. Who else was involved? What other secrets lay buried beneath the surface of Meadowbrook Estates? Determined to protect his family and his legacy, John doubled down on security, reaching out to veteran support groups and legal experts. But deep down he knew this was far from over. Because in the shadows of the quiet neighborhood, forces were gathering. Forces that would challenge everything John thought he knew. And soon the true battle for his home and honor would begin. The cryptic letter from Karen unsettled John more than anything else. There are others watching, she had warned. Who were these others? What had he stumbled into? John spent the next days combing through Karen's background with the help of Agent Harris. What they uncovered deepened the mystery. Karen wasn't just an overzealous HOA board member. Years ago, she had worked as a contractor for a private security firm, one rumored to be involved in clandestine operations linked to powerful developers and political figures. The rumors suggested that Karen's aggressive HOA tactics were part of a larger network designed to intimidate and control property owners who resisted. But why target John? The answer came when John received an unexpected visit from a man named Marcus, a quiet, serious figure claiming to be a former insider of the same security firm Karen had ties to. "Karen's not just harassing you over a boat," Marcus said, grimly. "She's part of a push to clear Meadowbrook Estates for a major redevelopment project. Your military boat, your presence, your refusal to comply, all of it stands in the way." John's mind raced. The spray paint, the intimidation, the forged complaints, it was all part of a plan to push him out. Marcus warned John to be cautious. "They play dirty. You're not just fighting a neighborhood feud, you're up against a powerful network with resources." John felt a mixture of anger and resolve. He wasn't about to let his home become a pawn in someone else's game. With Marcus's help, John started gathering evidence of the redevelopment plans. Documents, emails, insider testimonies. He contacted local journalists and community activists, turning the tide of public opinion. But Karen's warning proved prophetic. Strange things began happening. Cars parked suspiciously near his home, unexplained power outages, and a threatening voicemail that chilled John to the bone. "Back off, or there will be consequences." One night, the security cameras captured a group of masked figures attempting to break into John's property. The footage was grainy, but their intent was clear. John called the police immediately, but the attackers vanished before officers arrived. Fear gnawed at him, but he refused to be intimidated. The feds intensified their investigation, uncovering ties between Karen's network and local officials, revealing a web of corruption and coercion aimed at bulldozing Meadowbrook estates for profit. Neighbors, who had once supported Karen, began to question their loyalties as John's evidence mounted. John's fight became a symbol of resistance, inspiring other homeowners facing similar pressures across the state. But the danger was far from over. One evening, as John sat with his family, the power suddenly cut out. In the dark, a note slid under the door read, "You've poked the hornet's nest. This isn't over." John's wife grasped his hand tightly. "We're with you, no matter what." John looked out the window at the quiet street, shadows deepening. The battle for Meadowbrook Estates was no longer just about a boat. It was about justice, community, and survival. And John knew the final showdown was coming. The tension in Meadowbrook Estates had reached a boiling point. John knew the warnings weren't empty threats. The shadowy forces behind Karen's campaign weren't going down quietly. But he was ready. Every sleepless night, every whispered threat, every scar on his boat fueled his determination. To say. Community meeting that night was unlike any before. John stood at the front, flanked by Agent Harris and Marcus, the insider who had exposed the shadow network. The room was packed. Neighbors, journalists, even local officials who could no longer ignore the scandal. John's voice rang out clear and unwavering. "This isn't just about me or my boat. It's about protecting our homes, our rights, and our community from corruption and intimidation." The room buzzed with energy. People who had been silent for months began to speak up, sharing stories of similar harassment. The tide was turning. Suddenly, the doors burst open. Karen, escorted by federal agents, was brought in handcuffed, her face twisted with fury and desperation. "You don't understand what you're doing," she spat, voice shaking. "There are bigger players here, people you'll never take down." Agent Harris stepped forward calmly. "That's why we're here. This investigation is just the beginning." With Karen's arrest and the mounting evidence John had helped uncover, federal prosecutors launched a sweeping operation targeting the corrupt network manipulating Meadowbrook Estates and other communities. Key officials resigned, developers faced indictments, and the HOA was placed under federal oversight. John's military boat, now carefully restored to its former glory, stood as a symbol, a reminder of resilience in the face of intimidation. But the real victory was deeper. Neighbors who had once been divided came together, united by their shared stand against injustice. As the dust settled, John received an unexpected letter, this time from an anonymous supporter within the HOA. "Thank you for fighting for us. All. Your courage changed everything." John smiled, the weight finally lifting from his shoulders. The war had been hard fought, but justice had prevailed, and Meadowbrook Estates was free once more.